So what I'm doing here is we brought in Lee Varis. We put on this about AI, and everybody's wondering about AI, and so am I. And I started wondering about it because we have, with the Interactive Coaching Center, our membership. And in doing this, like I said, it's not a workshop or a boot camp, but we have something unique. And one of the things we have is like our assembly. And our assembly is for our members to be able to have access to ask questions of people they normally wouldn't have access to. Now, whether it's the head of a museum curators, literary agents, famous models, famous photographers, people that really know their shit. Like Lee Varis, pardon me, I know you know more than your shit, but what it is, he has some knowledge of things that I didn't even and wasn't even aware of. And the problem that I've had with AI is like everybody else. And we got into this whole thing about copyright, and our members joined in, and it got really interesting because I asked about copyright with an AI image that you correct, and we have that online, and you'll be able to see that. You can ask Lee any questions you want, and we're going to do that afterwards with the amount of people. But Lee's going to show you how he has evolved. And Lee, I've known because Lee's been a photographer for, I guess, for about 50 years. But when digital started of that time, he dove right into it. And anything from Photoshop or anything out, because he was also designing movie ads and movie posters, and you'll see what he's done. And anything that Lee has created over the years, he put so much labor into it. And when AI came along, it changed, I guess it changed his life, but now he's really into it and creating art pieces. And also, aside from that, other things that'll inspire you. So let me introduce you to Lee, and he could tell you more about himself.
All right, everybody good with this? You can see the whole screen?
Looks good.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm particularly interested in looking at this, but from the perspective of a photographer, which is a little bit different than like if you're an illustrator or a designer or something like that. Anyway, just to get this out of the way, this is my contact info. You can take a screenshot of this or use your iPhone, take a picture of it. This is just my contact info. My website, varis.com. I also have a website with my wife, Bobby Lane, where we lead photo adventures around the world, and it's bobbyandleesphotoadventures.com. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but let's just dig in here. So I wanted to give you some context for how I'm coming at this. I've been in photography, professional photography, for about 50 years, and 30 years of that has been involved in digital imaging. So I was a very early adopter, and most of what I was doing in my professional career was entertainment print advertising, and that mostly was movie posters. So this movie poster was my most famous and the easiest job I ever had, because all I did was photograph the moth. But that's the one everybody remembers. And this one, I did the photography and the digital compositing. It's funny, Tim Robbins saw this movie poster and asked his agent if his feet were really that big. And the fact is, those aren't his feet. Part of what I specialized in was body doubles. So everything from the neck down is somebody else, and we pasted, Tim's face over the body. And that was about 80% of my work was shooting this kind of stuff. This is my own 15 minutes of fame, because I don't know if you can see my cursor here, this little bit of neck there, that's my neck. And this is the coat and the trench coat and the tie, everything. I was the body double for this shoot because the art director hated the body double that his agency chose. And he kept looking at me and saying, "You look like Harrison Ford, get in here." So anyway, my 15 minutes of fame right there. And I'm putting this one in because that blue eye was the first digitally captured image used on a movie poster. And this was like 1993 when this movie came out. So you can tell I'm a very early adopter here. This was another poster that was kind of almost like a career. But as you can see, these movie posters are all composited, and they all heavily rely on computer imaging to create all these effects. So I also was sort of the semi-official photographer of the enterprise. So In the earlier Star Trek movies, certainly nowadays they don't even need models, but back at this time, they actually had to construct a model and photograph it for the movie. So every time there was a movie poster for Star Trek, there's always an image of the Enterprise on the movie poster, and that's my photo. So I wanted to kind of come back, circle back, and where we are now with AI. And I'm showing you here the very first key art. That's a term that they use in the movie entertainment industry. Key art is like the artwork that you use on movie posters, billboards, bus shelters, and that kind of stuff. This was for a VHS video box cover back when we were renting those from Blockbuster and all that. But this was an assignment where I had to create artwork for this dreadful B movie that they didn't have any artwork for. So I was tasked with generating some artwork that doesn't really have to do anything with the movie. I mean, there's nothing in the movie that's this good. It was a terrible movie. But I had to build this set. I had to hire models. I had to have hair and makeup, assistants, all kinds of lighting. This was all an attempt to get it all in camera, which you never do anymore. You just shoot elements and composite them. But this was all done in camera. It was actually shot on 4x5 film. And it took about 2 weeks of pretty intense work to pull this all together. So I thought, well, what if I was going to do this today? What if I got that assignment today? I'd most likely go into an AI rendering program like Midjourney. So here's the text prompt that I entered in for this image. And it tells you a lot, actually. So I was trying to replicate, I was doing a text prompt that was a description of the previous image. And so I'm asking for one old woman, one young woman on a hospital bed, all this stuff. And this is the first thing that Midjourney spit out. And I put the text in there just to give it, to kind of make it look like the movie poster. In fact, I got 4 different variations right off the bat, and I'll show you the first 3 that were, these are all very usable. I could have gone to the art director and said, here, what do you think? And they would have been ecstatic. They would have loved this. And this took about 30 seconds to type in that text prompt and another 30 seconds to generate the results. So this, for back in the day, I made a good living doing what I did, and basically that's all gone. These days, the agencies are probably going to do all this kind of stuff using AI imaging, and that's just the way it is. So I feel like as photographers, we have to get familiar with this, because you don't want to be a dinosaur, and you don't want to be waiting at the train station when the AI train leaves. So for the most part, what we're doing with AI image rendering is using text to describe an image. Like this was like the second image I made in Midjourney, and that's my text prompt. Dorothy's house from The Wizard of Oz picked up by the tornado. And you can kind of tell that the AI doesn't quite understand, but it is giving me a tornado and it's giving me a house, and it's kind of a cool image. And that just shows you that you can basically create anything you can imagine as long as you can describe it. And then even then you may not land on the image that you want. Crafting text prompts is not particularly easy. There's a lot of ins and outs, and you really need to play with it a lot to begin to get an understanding of how it all works. The image that you generate can be any medium. You can say, I want a painting. I want an oil painting. I want a photograph. I want a sculpture. You could also say, I want a painting done with colored yarn, right? So it can be a medium of any kind, including like mashups. It can be any style by any artist. You could say, I want a photograph in the style of Robert Farber. You can say you want a painting that looks like, you don't you can say you want a painting that looks like Picasso. All of these things, if the AI knows who the artist is, it can generate something that is in that style. But no matter how good your text prompt is, it's always going to be kind of surprising. And even if you train the AI on your own artwork, you're still never going to generate something that's exactly what you ask for. So there's always that element of surprise. And that's the thing that has fascinated me the most. Now, I put this image up because I was doing this lecture for a camera club in the Boston area. And I had everybody pick a photographer. Of course, everybody picked Ansel Adams. And I said, well, tell me what you want it to be. They said, well, a photo in the style of Ansel Adams, a mountain with snow, thunderclouds overhead, late afternoon. And this .AR stands for aspect ratio. That's, 4:5, 5:4. It was funny to me because we generated 4 results. And to my mind, this was the least interesting one, but that's the one that the camera club picked. But it looks kind of like an Ansel Adams photo. It's in black and white. I didn't ask for black and white, but it knows that Ansel Adams was a black and white photographer primarily, so that's what you're going to get. Now, here's an interesting one. This is me playing around with text prompts, and my text prompt for this image was a black and white photo of a man walking down a crooked alley, Dutch angle, in the style of Fritz Lang's Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And now that's a very specific reference that the AI understood. I generated a whole bunch of different outputs, and when it landed on this, I asked for variations. And this is kind of the cool thing. Once it lands on something that you like, you can ask it to give you some more variations. So it does stuff like this.
Great image, like that.
Oop. Went through that last one. So this one, the text prompt is a cinematic still of a robot walking towards camera in a surreal 1930s back alley, German cobblestone, black and white in the style of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Evening, low-key lighting, volumetric lighting, and the aspect ratio 16:9 for like cinema aspect ratio. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I ended up with a very serviceable image of this robot, but I wanted to put a woman standing next to the doorway there, and I had to actually generate that separately and composite it in with Photoshop. So a lot of what you end up doing when you're playing around with these AI things is you have to go back in and adjust things, adjust the colors, and composite certain elements together to try to get the thing that you're looking for. Very often, you just don't get it straight out of Midjourney. I'm going to throw this in here because this is sort of like what we see the most on the internet are these sort of meme images. And I have a whole series of these that are quite funny. And Santa Claus as a different various style. So that was my prompt, steampunk Santa. That's all I did. And Midjourney started generating these sort of images. I just picked the ones I liked. We have Sumo Santa, of course, you don't want to get on his bad side. And then there's Samurai Santa. There's Jazz Santa. Rockstar Santa, of course. And, it's amazing to me that Midjourney understood the reference. So you say Godfather Santa, and it knows exactly how to generate a Santa Claus that's like the Godfather. Really pretty funny. Bozo Santa, this gives certain people nightmares. Bollywood Santa. Mariachi Santa. Rasta Santa, because he's got a ganja scope to find out who's been naughty or nice. There's the drag queen Santa. He doesn't care whether you've been naughty or nice. He just cares if you have style. And my favorite is 007 Santa. And you can also animate these things. So I'll show you that here. If it decides to move, there it is. He's taking his drink. Shaken, not stirred. And all I did was prompt 007 Santa, and it gave me all these girls and this kind of curious nutcracker image in here. So as a photographer, I think probably the first thing you'd consider using Midjourney for is to generate a new background. And in fact, you can do that inside of Photoshop directly now using generative fill. But so let's just give you kind of a few examples here. Bobby and I, my wife, Bobby Lane, and I lead a trip to Venice for Carnival every year. And we've been doing it for the past 13 years. And it's just an amazing scene. There's all these costumers with these really elaborate costumes walking around Venice, and they'll stop and pose for you. And it's like a kid in a candy store. Everywhere you turn, there's a fantastic subject, but not necessarily a fantastic background. So I was thinking, well, how about I put them inside of a Venetian palace? Now, it's really hard to secure a Venetian palace, especially during Carnival. It would be exorbitantly expensive. So instead, I turned to Midjourney and I asked for a Venetian palace with orange and teal color accents, and it generated this.
And that's where you're living now, I see.
Yes, pretty much this is my background here. So pop those people right in there, and there you go. It looks like they're in the Venetian palace. A couple more examples like this. Here's one early in the morning. All the costumers will line up along the Grand Canal, and so it's very easy to get images like this. But let's put her somewhere else. So I had Midjourney generate under the portico of the Doge's palace. Now, what was funny about this is that Midjourney put these street lamps inside the Doge's palace portico, and it put two sets of columns, which is not like what it really is like, but it was kind of interesting. And so I thought, okay, well, let's stick my subject in there. And, you use a little bit of Photoshop skill to kind of make it look like it belongs. We don't see her feet, so this was pretty easy. Here's another one, another costumer shot in Burano and on an overcast day, so we have these soft shadows. So I thought, okay, let's generate another background. This is another version of, it's not really the Doge's palace, but this looks very similar to what's on the other side of the Doge's palace, long corridor. Again, they put these street lamps in there, which is kind of unusual. But let's stick our costumer in there. So this is just simple Photoshop compositing techniques. I just have to make sure I put a soft drop shadow in there and make the lighting sort of, soften the contrast to match this sort of foggy lighting that I have here. Another example, this one I was calling for an actual costumer in place in this palace that's got some warm lighting coming from the right and a blue hour looking out the window. And this is kind of, if you look closely at this, it's kind of odd. This costumer doesn't look like a real person. You can see the hands are kind of weird. Very often when Midjourney is making a figure really small in a bigger scene, it doesn't do a really great job with faces and hands. So my intention, though, was to composite a real photograph on top of this. And I managed to get the lighting matches pretty much. So it makes sense. It has that drop shadow. It's not quite perfect, but it fools the eye enough that you don't really read it as being a composite image. Another one, another Venetian palace with orange and teal, and our costumer there. Here, I just have to make sure that I put the sort of an out of focus reflection. It makes it look much more like he's actually standing on the floor. So these are typical Photoshop things that you would do. Here's one of my favorite ones, very more elaborate Venetian palace here, and I've got the costumers with the lighting matches, so the light's coming behind them, and again, notice the reflection in the marble floor. So this you can have a lot of fun with, and it's still your photograph because the subject is an actual photograph. And in fact, the copyright, U.S. Copyright Office declared that you could copyright this, since a major portion of this is an actual photograph that you took and you did the Photoshop compositing. So
please tell us a little more about copyright when it comes to this. Not in great detail for now, because we already have that. But
initially, the Copyright Office basically said copyright is for human authorship. So when an AI generates an output, that's not copyrightable. And since then, they've been kind of coming back to, well, there are some instances where we might imagine that we could copyright. Basically, it's really still a little vague, but it boils down to, does the human author interact with this in some way that makes it more than just the output of a text prompt? So they're flat out saying just a text prompt does not qualify for copyright protection. But if you interact with it, if you composite, if you use it and you do other things to it and you add photos to it, then you can copyright it. So it's something to keep in mind if you want to protect your artwork. I suspect that in the future we'll probably end up somewhere where they'll allow AI artwork to be copyrighted. But at the moment, it's still a little sketchy. You have to have something in it that you say is done by a human. So getting back to that, there's this other area which is really interesting. So you can use a photo, you could upload a photo, and there are what they call AI upscaling applications. So you may be familiar with Topaz Gigapixel. Gigapixel introduced a feature called something like generate detail, and it actually it re-renders the photo and adds all this extra detail. There's an online platform that I use called Magnific, which is really good for adding creative detail to photos. Not that this photo really needs anything, but as part of my experiments, I uploaded this photo and I said, okay, add some extra detail. And it
That's
generated
your
this.
photo, right? That original one is
But
your
this,
one.
yeah, this one is my original photo, and I'm essentially just upscaling it, but cranking the creativity slider. So it's a creative upscale, and it's the same photo, the same composition, same elements, but with different detail. And, you can argue all day about whether this is any better. It's just different.
There's no argument. It isn't.
I mean, this it didn't need to have anything done to it, but, it's interesting to see what the AI just generates on its own. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to take an infrared image and ask the AI to re-render it and upscale it. And the AI doesn't understand infrared at all. It doesn't know that it's looking at an infrared picture. So it tends to interpret all this light area. This is actually moss that was green. And the infrared, this is a 590 nanometer infrared filter. And so it's converting the colors in a weird way. And what would have been dark green moss is now rendering as very pale because it reflects a lot of infrared light. But the AI doesn't understand that. So it wants to generate snow scenes. So kind of fun stuff. Here's another one. This one, an infrared captured in Iceland. Again, this is moss that's kind of everywhere in the volcanic landscape in Iceland. And its rendering here is very bright because it's reflecting a lot of infrared. So the AI, you just crank the creativity a little bit and just assumes that that's frothy water. And so it's generated this sort of shallow stream with frothy water that makes no sense. You can also add a text prompt when you're upscaling something. So I could say, make this look like an alien planet. And it will generate something that looks like an alien planet. So if you're looking to do an illustration for a science fiction book, or you might be able to just take one of your landscape pictures, generate something like this, and now this is copyrightable because it's directly referenced to one of your copyrightable photographs. Here's another example, just kind of creatively upscaling it. Let's see if we can add some more interesting details. And so it does this, but what I found interesting is that it replaced the British flag, because this is a castle in Scotland. It replaced the British flag with an American flag. So, like I said, always surprising. You never know what you're going to get. Now, this is a regular photograph composited in Photoshop. And I did a lot of this kind of what I would call photo illustration stuff, where there's several photographs blended together here in Photoshop, run it through the AI, and it changes the model a little bit. So here's a thing, this model would require a model release to use this for anything, right? But the AI generated version There's no person that looks like this is not a real person. So there's no model release involved. So you're going to see companies cheap out on models because they know they can generate them using AI. And as tragic as that is, it's going to be happening a lot. So just be aware of that. Here's another shot that we did in Venice. We always arrange for these sort of custom photo shoots with costumers, and we have about 12 participants with us. They're all lined up in a row here, photographing the same scene. And this is a light painting shot. So this actually was all done in camera, and I'm waving a pixel stick light wand behind the subject here. You can kind of see over here, it's sort of ragged and low res. You can see the pixel structure of this light wand thing. And I run it through AI, and it eliminates all that pixely light structure, but it seems to not like people wearing masks. So it decided to re-render the real devil in here. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. Perfectly great photo of horses on the beach from another workshop that Bobby and I gave. And, you know, just sort of edged up, made a little sharper, more detail in the image using that creative slider in AI. Here's the Bow Bridge in Central Park, iconic location, but I shot it in infrared, color infrared. And so all the dark leaves are rendering very bright. And of course, AI thinks it's a snow scene. So it's going to re-render it like this. Another infrared of horses on the beach and generating the creative, upscaling it, renders this. You know, there are areas of this that are really interesting. I mean, I like the way it kind of added a little more sculptural feeling to the woman, but because the AI didn't quite understand a blue horse, it decided that the horse must be wearing a denim outfit. So it made this weird, like jean outfit. And also take a look up here in the upper right corner, the saddle has now morphed into a person. So if you crank those creativity sliders up to get something useful, you may end up with a lot of garbage. And so I have to composite back into the original. If I just wanted the girl, I have to composite the original stuff back in. And so was my final here, just to get something a little more interesting in the woman. Is it an improvement? Well, I was playing around. I'm not sure it is. I mean, the softer look is more appropriate for the infrared, but there you go. Here's, again, a photograph from one of our workshops. We do workshops in the Hollywood glamour style of lighting, in the style of George Hurrell. Bobby actually rented her studio out in Los Angeles to George during the last 12 years of his life. So she actually witnessed the master at work. And so it's almost like a direct contact with George Hurrell. So we do these workshops and we do this Hurrell style lighting. Well, I thought this guy was really interesting. So I took him into Magnific to upscale it. And Magnific's kind of interesting because they allow you to pick different models, and they have one called science fiction and horror. So I used that model and it generated this much scarier looking image. And here's another one that's it's a photograph, an actual photograph, actually several photographs, all composited together using an old software platform that is extinct now. It used to be called Live Picture. It was a very unique program, and I did a lot of work with it. And there's nothing wrong with this, but again, experimenting. What is it going to do if I crank the creativity slider up and it generates all this extra detail? And another thing that I've found is that AI really loves this pareidolia, the kind of notion that it sees details that aren't there, like these other figures. It added all this stuff, all these other figures and all this detail, and it's now really become something completely different. Here's an infrared in Iceland again. And one of the things that the color rendering kind of gives you these inverted colors. So again, this is not snow, it's moss on the side, and this is regular water, but it looked a little bit like lava in an ice scape. And so the AI re-rendered it and put in all this extra detail that makes it look like ice and molten lava. Now here's the image that was in that email. I thought it was kind of funny because this is a regular photograph. It's an infrared photograph. So throwing it into the AI just to see what it'll do, again, sort of not necessarily an improvement, but here's more detail. And, it's a different image now. Now it's a full color image. It's not an infrared image.
Once again, I like your original image better.
Yeah, definitely, definitely better. This was like a little too illustrated, a little edgy, and it's just sort of over the top. But you realize that you could go anywhere in between. You could get something that's very similar to this. If you just crank that creativity slider, it will do something as much as this or even more radical. Topaz Gigapixel primarily is designed to upscale photographs and try to maintain as much integrity with the original as possible. But they've been introducing these new functions where you can add extra detail. If, for instance, you have a bad iPhone photo and you want to re-render it and put extra detail in, Topaz has a function in it that allows you to do that. It's kind of broken at the moment, but it's coming back. And so I thought, well, let's crank the creativity 100% in Topaz and see what it does. And it did something like this, which is god-awful, but, sometimes you can generate multiple versions of this. I don't mind her face so much, but the rest of it sucks. But if I generated other things multiple times, I could composite together to create a composite image that was more than the sum of its parts, and that would be more interesting. So there's the original again. An interesting thing you could do also, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on, is you could use something like ChatGPT to describe this image. So I can upload this image to ChatGPT and say, give me a text prompt for Midjourney to generate this image. And then I can take that text prompt and feed it back in. But what I'm going to get from Midjourney is not going to match this at all. It's going to be variations on it. Even if I ask for her to be looking in a certain direction or the horse to be in a certain, it will generate a whole bunch of examples, and they're all different, but they all have that horse and the girl on the beach. She's wearing different things, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me ask you the previous
This one?
No, before that one.
This one?
Is that Midjourney completely?
This is Midjourney. This is all Midjourney.
That's beautiful composition with a nice mood. Once you start manipulating it, it just...
Yeah, if you kind of text prompt for this, and there are features in Midjourney where there's sort of a standard Midjourney style. That's what's applied to this image. So Midjourney wants to give you something that's very cinematic. And, this has that kind of cinematic feeling to me. And there are different ways of styling. Here I asked for a cloudy sky, so it gave me something a little bit different. We'll get into this, but there's a whole thing about generating using style references. Now, here, this is a different AI platform called Leonardo AI. And this uses Stable Diffusion as sort of the engine. Stable Diffusion is an open source AI rendering model. And I actually fed it a picture reference. I gave it that infrared picture. And I text prompted for the same thing, but every version that Leonardo generated was in the same position with the light coming from the right, pretty much every single one. And occasionally you'll get some weird thing like how the sun is shining over there when the light's clearly coming from, it's like the sun is behind the horse's butt. It's weird. The other thing that AI rendering tends to do is it tends to crop too tightly, and crops a lot of people at the ankles. So you have to, you'll have to go in and adjust for that. But I mean, it's certainly a serviceable image outside of the fact that the sun's in the wrong position.
Or the butt's in the wrong position.
Or the butt's in the wrong, the light's in the wrong position altogether. Look at the light on our face. The sun's clearly out of frame to the right. And yet we have this glow on the horizon behind the horse's butt with a reflection in the water. It's nonsense.
Let me say something that I don't mind her ankles being cut off here because it captures a moment that's a real moment. If it was a photographic moment that was posed, then you make sure her ankles are in. By not having her ankles in, it makes it a real photograph.
Well, I think it would be a real photograph with her foot in the picture as well. It's just a matter of tilting the camera
right.
down.
I mean, I'm just saying.
It's not a mistake that I would make, right? But it's very common with AI. That's all I'm saying.
Right. I get it.
So besides actually, in that case, what we looked at was kind of like a photo reference because I actually used the photo and the prompt to generate those images. And they're all fairly close in idea to the original photograph. Here's another example. There's that Scottish castle again in infrared, this time black and white infrared. And using this as the photo reference in Leonardo, which is a different platform than Midjourney, it tends to do a better job of matching the particulars of the reference photo. I said, give me a Greek temple. And so it generated this. And then in Photoshop, I did generative fill for that horse in the foreground. I just made a rectangular selection that said a white horse, and it put that horse in there. Here's that again, the original photo, black and white infrared. And I was looking at this as I know that the AI really kind of wants to turn this into a snow scene. So how about a Japanese castle in a snowy scene? But you can kind of see, right? It matches the shape and the composition pretty much. I went ahead and generated these samurai here separately and composited them in. And then I generated some snow and composited that in to finish the scene. So here it's reference to an original photograph, and I've done extra work to finish the image. So I feel like this could be copyrighted. In fact, this won an ASMP national award of some kind. They're supposed to print it in a book. I'm still waiting for the book, and this happened last year. Here's another kind of example of this kind of idea of photo referencing. This is a waterfall in Iceland. It's very famous because you can get behind the waterfall in this cave, and it's this huge environment and I didn't have a wide enough lens, but my iPhone had the super wide lens, so I took a picture with the iPhone, and it's, I thought, well, let's try and get some more out of it, and I took it into Photoshop and really try to make it more dramatic and crisped it up, and I took this image and fed it into ChatGPT for a text description. I said, okay, describe this image. And I used that text description, fed it back into Midjourney, and this is what I got. So it's a completely different image, but it basically uses all the same elements. So hard to say. If I could prove the provenance of this, I might be able to copyright it. But this is purely generated from the text prompt, which I got from ChatGPT. So, now something really interesting happens in Midjourney when you feed it two images. So you could give it two reference images and say blend between these two. So here's two original photos. The one on the right is an infrared capture in Venice of a costumer, and that's the real Doge's Palace portico. You can see the columns and everything like that. And then on the left is a in-camera multiple exposure. It's something I've been playing around with a lot. It's kind of a still life, and there's a jar and feathers and stuff like that. That's kind of a cool image. And so I say blend. Now, what Midjourney will do is it'll take elements of each one and kind of mash them together, but it's not like I'm going to put the costumer in front of this jar with the feathers. It doesn't work that way. So it's really going to try to integrate it in a bizarre way. So you get these surprises where it'll do something like this, and it's really strange. There is some aspects of the image. There's a person in it. There's a sort of glass, and I guess the feathers have turned into these weird glass shards or something. Fascinating. Here's another variation of that blend. I'm blending these two elements together, and it just does this stuff. And it's like, wow, why, how? If I was trying to do a photo illustration, I couldn't imagine this to even attempt to get there. So, this is sort of, I like to say that I'm inviting the AI to hallucinate a new image based on my two starting images. And it generates really fascinating things. Yeah.
Let me ask you something quickly. Now that you're getting into images that really look great, how do you claim ownership to that? Copyright.
Well, this is gonna require some kind of a test case. So we're going to have to get a judge to decide if that reference, because I'm giving it two of my photographs, before it does anything, it has to work from those. So since those photographs are mine and those are copyrightable, the ruling is a little vague on how far they're willing to go to copyright an AI.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of judges available soon.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be in the next 5 years is going to be very interesting for all this. But I would bet that they'll come down on the side of AI at some point in the future. So as much as you may hate it now, just be ready for when it all comes together. So, these are, again, this is a blend between those two photos that I showed up front, as is this. And I have no idea how or why or what decision-making process it's using, but I find these results really interesting. And they go beyond what my own imagination would come up with. So that's what I'm really fascinated by. So here's another reference, the same jar with the feathers, but now a different subject. This is from one of our workshops in New Jersey. We do this kind of drag the shutter workshop here.
By the way, let me say one other thing, because you just said a key thing that brings it up. If it comes above or beyond what your imagination could come to, that's a very honest statement, but it brings out the point that, well, then who deserves the credit as the creator?
Well, it's very interesting, in some sense, you're acting like an art director, right? You're going, I want you to do something with these things, right? And just show me what you can do. And in essence, that's what I'm doing. But then it's going to generate a lot of crap. And somebody has to decide what a good image is. So when I feed it this, I'm going to be looking at 30, 40, 50 images, and most of them are not going to be that good. But then every once in a while, I'll land on something like this. And I'll go, yeah, that's very cool. Now, I had to go in and do some color adjustments, optimize this for printing, upscale it, which changes some things. Yeah.
I was going to say, so my suggestion to you as a talented photographer and to others as a talented photographer is to claim ownership and credibility and credit for that image, is to work with your own image like you just did, and you be the source of that image being created, the main source. And that's where I feel, as a creative person and as a photographer, where your emphasis should be. That's what I say through my own experience.
Well,
unless you're talented and stick.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, we have to start thinking about this as a new art form, because it's not really photography, right? But it does require some effort. It actually requires considerable effort to get something that looks like this. This is not something that just happens when you put a text prompt in and hit enter. It's just not going to give you this. So, you
also have the talent as a digital imaging person, so you can claim some creative thing, because you know that. Sure. If I wanted to Photoshop, the thing would look terrible. So that's why I just,
So here's another example. Image on the left is in Photoshop, but it's basically just a filter. It's a filter that I I generated these balls and this fractal thing wrapped around it. That was all done pretty much all digitally. There's no photography in that, but I did do this. I made circular selections for all those balls. And then the one on the right is a photograph from that Drag the Shutter workshop that we did in New Jersey. And now I'm going to do a blend between these two. And the thing that's fascinating to me is that when we think of, okay, blend these two, you're sort of looking for those specific elements in the image. And when you get something like this, it's like, well, yeah, there's a figure there and there's kind of fractal things here, but this kind of fascinating thing, I just find this really interesting. Now, I don't think this is a photograph. It's kind of a photo illustration. There are aspects of it that look kind of photographic, like this man wearing makeup. It's kind of photographic, but it also looks like a painting. And that's kind of, also sort of fascinating area, because you can create these essentially photographic images that look very painterly, or images that just flat out look like a painting. No question about it, this looks like an oil painting, right? And it all came from those two images that I showed, the fractal balls and the guy, against the green. How it arrived at this, I don't know. But I'm willing to keep throwing this stuff at Midjourney and seeing what it generates, because it's just beautiful stuff. So the other thing that Midjourney offers that none of the other platforms offers is this idea about the style reference code. So there are a number of these. You can find these all over the internet. This is from a website called Dream Prompts. And I don't know why they call it prompts, because there are no prompts on that website, but there are style reference codes. So if you use this ... sref and this number after your text prompt, it will apply this particular look to your image, right? So you can get all kinds of different looks and just apply them to your image. And I'm not as interested in this, because basically this style reference is totally Midjourney generated. It's not, there's no human interaction to come up with a style reference. So it's not like it's copying a person's actual unique style. It is a unique style that Midjourney has generated that you can use to apply this style to your images. But it can be a lot of fun to play around with this stuff. And you all have to know that designers are going to be doing this a lot. They're going to be playing with this kind of stuff, and they're not going to be calling you to take a picture. So, just be aware of that. I think, photography may sort of migrate more into a fine art medium rather than a commercial medium. Other than, say, celebrity portraiture, I think that's always going to be very strong, because even though you can generate an image of any celebrity you want, people are still interested in the actual photo of the actual person. Wedding photography, people are still going to be interested in actual photos of an event that they attended. And, so there's, wedding and portrait photography. I think that's still a very viable area for photography. But these sort of photo illustration things for ad concepts and stuff, I think that's all going to become the province of Midjourney and other AI image rendering platforms. I mean, you can generate these sort of fashion-like pictures that are stunning. I could even have taken an image of a dress as a character reference and generated this image, and that would match that dress that I had a photograph of. So you're going to see this a lot in magazine illustrations and fashion and all that kind of stuff.
Great competition. Great.
Yeah, and it's all, these are all blends as well. So they did come from original photographs, but they don't look anything like the original photographs. And that's where we're going to get, it's going to require, a test case with a judge to decide, and lawyers arguing for both sides and all that kind of stuff. Could be a book cover, I'm fascinated by these sort of tableau images that are surreal, because Midjourney especially loves to generate these very surreal images, and it's just a lot of fun. This one actually involved some extra Photoshop compositing to make it to compose it exactly the way I wanted. All the elements were generated by Midjourney, but I did move things around a bit and change the colors and things. A few more examples here, and then we're getting to our end here. We're going over time a little bit. This was a blend between two photos, and I had text prompted amber waves of creative energy. And it did this image. I had a blend that had some African dancers in one of the images, and it generated this for me. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Here's my website information. And I do put out a newsletter every Tuesday. I call it Phototech Tuesday. So if you want to get on the newsletter mail list, just scan that QR code. And give you a second here for those of you that might be interested. It'll be in the recording. So, all right. Now we're into the question area. So
okay, let me just start out quickly by saying, well, first, thank you, Lee, and your talents, both as not just a photographer, but as a digital imaging person, and what you've done with it from Photoshop to current is great, and it's inspiring. And one of the reasons that we asked, or the main reason we asked Lee to come on, is because what we do with the coaching center is we create assignments based on what they learn and what they're inspired by, and to create something. And this time, because of our presentation by Mark Gerard, who's part of the, who's one of the people that are involved in the photo workshop. I mean, photo workshop. Stop sharing screen. In the digital imaging. We gave an assignment out for our members that they get rewarded for, and they wanted to know, what do we do? You know, what do we do? How do we create our own work to be into using AI to go forward? And Lee, I hope, helped answer your question. So let's continue and ask Lee questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Then how many people have actually played with Midjourney or even Photoshop with generative fill? And all right, so you've dipped your toe in. So we could just talk about any questions you have about moving forward with that little journey that you started.
I have a question for Lee regarding uploading your images to platforms like Midjourney. Do they then have your image to use for their own training for the future so that they can use for other people?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Now, on Midjourney, you can choose to be private, and I think most of the platforms have this option where you're either participating in the community and allowing everybody to see your uploads, like you would if you posted something to Facebook, right? Or you can say, if you're paying for the service, you can say just make it private. Now, when you upload something for Midjourney to use, all the processing happens on that remote server. So they're going to store that image. It will be on their server somewhere. And whether they say, well, we don't use people's artwork in our training, no matter what they say, I guarantee you they're using anything you upload as part of their training. So if you have some sort of fundamental issue with that, then maybe just don't get involved with AI. I think that even Adobe, who from the beginning has claimed that we don't use any unvetted images in our training, I'm pretty sure they're lying. I mean, because they're basically using Adobe stock, and they must have started doing this long ago. And I don't remember seeing any email from Adobe asking permission to use any of my images that might be in Adobe stock, right? So, I think a lot of the platforms are sort of scrambling right now to make deals with various publishers, and I'm sure there will be a deal coming up with Getty Images, and we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out. This is so early that nothing has been decided yet. But if it's like anything else, when the first digital came out, everybody was kind of going, you can take the film out of my cold, dead fingers. And, no serious photographer will ever use digital. And within 5 years of the first viable digital camera being available, pretty much all the professional photographers were shooting digital because that's what their clients wanted. They wanted it now, they want it yesterday, and tomorrow all our demands are going to be changed, so fucking stay awake, right? That's what clients are like. And so that commerce is going to drive the adoption of AI imaging, whether you like it or not. So if you want to stay in the game and you want to at least be informed, you should be playing with it now to try and figure out where this can fit in your creative life.
Who else?
Anyone else?
How does Midjourney compare to Photoshop Generative AI?
Midjourney, to me, kind of still generates better sort of photographic output. It has a certain default style which you can turn off, and it seems to, it's like one of the earliest ones. So they've worked on their models and fine tuning for longer than most others. But Photoshop has, Adobe's Firefly, which is essentially what they're calling their AI rendering platform, has gotten a lot better than it did when it was first announced. And it's a little bit playing catch up. It's not as fully featured a platform as some of these others. For me, I think the dominant ones being Midjourney is number one, and then this Leonardo AI is an interesting one. I could very briefly show you. I just think we don't have a lot of time for me to go and demo everything. But if that was of an interest, I could do that. We could look at Firefly and Midjourney and Leonardo and some of these others.
And by the way, anything that's an interest, let us know, and we'll arrange a meeting for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back and do more on this topic. I will, if I'm not getting what I want exactly out of one platform, I'll try another one. I'm in fact working on, hopefully, I will have a commercial project that utilizes AI, and I've already started playing around. And I think it's the ability to use a different platform to generate slightly different results is going to be a necessity if you're working with a client, because you want to be able to show variety that just to see which is the look that this client's going to like the best. And they all have their own kind of personality. And there's a bunch of free ones out there too, and there's a bunch that came out of China that are also kind of interesting. So if you're really going to dive into this head first, I suspect that you're going to need to be up to speed on a couple, at least 2 or 3 different platforms.
Let me. I have a question on behalf of our members, because as I said earlier, one of the reasons that you're here is because our members had a question as photographers with the assignment that they had. And we asked them to take, because they're creating their own signature style is important. And one of the assignments was to do an image that would be in the style of what they would use AI for or whatever. Is there any immediate suggestion that you would have for them to apply that to that current assignment? The assignment, as we said, the sponsors reward them based on to try to inspire them and to motivate them. And they ask so many questions of, how do I apply this to what I'm currently doing to find my style or to apply it to the way I shoot? Well,
Unless you're a famous photographer that Midjourney or an other platform would know about, and you can, this information is available. You can find out what are what artists are commonly referenced in Midjourney, for instance. If you are a famous person that has a recognizable style, but you have your own personal style, the easiest way to do this is to upload one of your images, a sort of an iconic image that represents your style. And then you use that as a style reference at the image reference in Midjourney, and it will generate images that more or less follow that look. So that would be the easiest way to get into it.
Well, that's good advice. And I guess also, if there's a photographer or an artist that inspires you, whether they're a painter or photographer,
Yeah.
let them reference that to create what you would get out of I get it. And I hope our members do.
Okay.
Another
So-
question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, another question that somebody supported the question. The examples that you gave, it seemed like the people in the photos were ideal looking people, like high-end model types. Is that the default? And how do you get different kinds of people to show?
Yeah, Midjourney has a sort of default style, and it wants to generate that kind of look. It's sort of like the high fashion, high end magazine look. That's its general style. You can turn that off. There's what's called style raw, where you turn that off, and then it's only paying attention to the text prompt, and it's not applying its particular kind of commercial style to it. So you can text prompt for a regular looking person, a person of any ethnicity, male or female, old, young, anything in between. And if you use the style raw, tends to give you stuff that if you're asking for a photograph, remember you can ask for any medium. If you ask for a photograph in style raw, you tend to get things that look a little more realistic, but they will also generate examples that look like snapshots as well. So you can play around with it and get like a portrait of an old man that looks more like something that you might have grabbed on the street, right? So you can get that kind of look as long as you know how to work all the sliders and all the parameters and all that kind of stuff. So it does take some experimenting, and there's tons of information on YouTube about how to do all this. There's probably more videos about Midjourney than any other platform, but they're out there. There's a lot of instruction, and it just takes a little bit of research to find out how all that works.
So
Yes, and let me say that we have a few more minutes, so a couple of more important questions, and we should really. Lee's been talking away for the last hour and a half or whatever, so we should give him a break. So, any other important questions? Please, let's do that. And by the way, some of the questions you were asking in Mark Jaros's video that we have from the last auditorium that we did are kind of really answered in that video, technically how to work with Midjourney. So let's ask for a few more questions, and I guess that should do it.
So I have a comment about Midjourney. It does have its own default style, but you can set that style. So, unless you've gone through the personalized style setup, it's going to have a generalized style. But if you go through and create your own personal style, then everything will default into that style. And as far as like creating things that are not models and stuff, I did a whole series on creating Neanderthals in Midjourney, which was really interesting and a lot of fun. So
wow, Santa Suma did that.
Yeah, there's a new feature in Midjourney called mood boards. That's another way to generate your own personal style reference, because you can upload your pictures and assemble multiple images into what they call a mood board and apply that to any generations you get out of Midjourney. So there are ways of making Midjourney your own for sure.
Let me say two more questions, and we should let Lee
Let's ask
and go
Annie-
digitalize.
Annie posted her question in the chat, but also Annie, you want to say about the prompts? I think it's an important question.
That the prompts are absolutely crucial to creating this. So you showed us a couple of images with very simple prompts, but then afterwards you showed us very sophisticated images, but I I had no clue to how you commanded it. And this for me is what would have been really interesting.
Okay, well,
Well,
that's a great question. Let me interrupt and say, Annie, that's a great question, and that's something we should concentrate on and do a meeting exactly for that purpose.
Please.
The
I will,
language aspect,
yeah,
exactly.
I will say really briefly, I struggle with text prompts, and there's a lot of frustration when you text prompt something in. Sometimes Midjourney gets it, and sometimes it doesn't. And there's no telling. It doesn't really, what you have to understand is that Midjourney doesn't know when you say, I want 2 women, one black and one white, it doesn't understand what you're talking about. It understands women, so it's going to give you women. It doesn't understand number. So you could say, give me 2 of this, give me 3 of this, give me 4 of that. It doesn't understand that at all. It'll give you more than one, but it can't count. It's just like maddening. So again, we're very early in this stage, so it will get better. But at this point, I would say don't hang your coat on the text prompt. All of the images that I showed you had used very, very simple text prompts and 2 reference images. So a lot of visual content was in those reference images. And I was sort of inviting a response that didn't depend on the prompt.
So
Right? Sometimes the prompt was just blend, one word.
And you downloaded the image created by Midjourney and you installed it in Photoshop and then blended your images in Photoshop.
Well, like the backgrounds and stuff like that. Yeah, those are composited in Photoshop. But a lot of the images that look like composite images were Midjourney generated. They weren't composite images that I blended together later on. They were composited. I only fed it the 2 images and had it blend between them. Like the guy in the dystopian burnt out city scene, that was text prompted, right? So you can get there with a text prompt, but it's really frustrating because it doesn't always get what you're trying to tell it.
Can you alter it with further prompts?
Yes, there's a remix feature where if you get something that's almost there, you can remix it, add to the prompt. You can put negative prompts. If something is showing up that you don't want there, you do -- no and then tell it, don't put this in, right? You. So yes, there's all kinds of stuff and it's getting better and better. Midjourney is going to announce a new version that we're all excited for. So everything changes constantly. So now is the time to get involved in it and start to get comfortable with it. And it will get better at understanding things. It's getting better at rendering hands, but it still sucks. Because you say a hand, it doesn't know that there's 5 fingers on a hand. It's giving you a collection of pixels that it associates with the word hand. And it's a predictive model, right? So it's going, the most statistically likely response to this text is this collection of pixels. That's the extent of its understanding. So you have to kind of wrap your head around that.
Okay, so please keep in mind that you're speaking to someone who's been involved in digital imaging from the very beginning, and what he's done and how he's applied it over the years and how it evolved from Photoshop to this. And there's so many questions to this new thing. And if you're a member, please let us know what you want to get out of it. We'll invite Lee back and we'll develop this and build on it more. And we've had really great interest. And I think, Lee, you've been really wonderful in sharing your talents. And,
hey, I want to say I'm happy to find this forum. Robert, I love it. And Lee, your portfolio is outstanding. I loved what I was watching.
That's
so
Clay Blackmore. God, I've known him before I met
Thank you, Clay. Thank you.
Clay, how are you?
It's my pleasure, guys.
Good.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no,
Anytime.
We appreciate it. And it's been
Mark,
really
thanks,
great,
Mark.
Lee. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for like Clay Blackmore and friends that I've known for so many years and I haven't seen for such a long time. So please look what we're about, and I hope you become part of it. Anyway, thank you.
Great forum. I'm going to return. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Lee.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.